Rachel Turner had always seemed like the perfect wife, but behind closed doors a dangerous secret was brewing. Ethan Carter, her former lover, had reappeared in her life, and what started as a casual reconnection soon spiraled into a passionate affair. But when the lies began to unravel and the pressure mounted, the affair turned deadly. What began as stolen moments of passion quickly escalated into a horrific crime that no one could have seen coming. Rachel's seemingly perfect life was about to implode, leaving behind a trail of lies, betrayal, and a murder that would change everything. The Turner family was the picture of suburban perfection. Michael and Rachel had built a life together that most people envied. 2 children, a beautiful home, and respected careers in their small town of Ridgewood. Michael, a successful lawyer, was well known in the community for his sharp mind and dedication to his clients. Rachel, a devoted elementary school teacher, had a nurturing personality that made her beloved by both her students and their parents. They attended all the right social gatherings, hosted neighborhood barbecues, and were seen as a solid, reliable couple who had it all figured out. To the outside world, they were the epitome of success. But beneath the surface, their relationship had begun to show cracks. Michael's demanding job had kept him away from home more often than not, leaving Rachel alone with their children most nights. While he was climbing the ladder in his career, Rachel's life had become confined to the walls of their house. The once vibrant woman, full of laughter and energy, was now weighed down by the endless responsibilities of raising children and managing a home. Slowly, her sense of fulfillment eroded. Michael, unaware of the growing void in his wife's heart, continued his professional climb. He was consumed with work, attending late-night meetings and long business trips, never noticing the signs that Rachel's smile had faded. The distance between them grew, and while he was fully invested in his clients and colleagues, Rachel felt increasingly neglected. She began to feel isolated in the house they had built together, her loneliness becoming more pronounced with each passing day. It was during this time of emotional distance that Rachel unexpectedly ran into Ethan Carter. Ethan had been Rachel's college boyfriend, the one she had once been madly in love with before life took them in separate directions. They had lost touch after Rachel married Michael, but their brief relationship had always held a special place in her heart. When she spotted Ethan one afternoon in town, it was as though a spark from her past had been reignited. Ethan, now a successful business owner, looked much the same, confident, charming, and still carrying the same magnetic energy that had once drawn Rachel to him. They exchanged pleasantries, and before long, their casual reconnection turned into long conversations over coffee. Ethan was attentive, a stark contrast to Michael, who had been consumed by his work. For the first time in years, Rachel felt seen and heard. They talked about old memories, shared regrets, and laughed like they had when they were younger. But it wasn't just nostalgia that kept drawing them together. It was the undeniable chemistry that still simmered between them. Rachel found herself thinking about Ethan more and more. The late-night conversations, the lingering touches, and the stolen glances felt like an escape from her increasingly stifling life. But she never intended for things to go further. She wasn't the type to betray her family. Yet despite her best intentions, Rachel found herself slipping deeper into a dangerous game, one she couldn't easily control. The affair began innocently enough, but it quickly became a tangled web that threatened to unravel everything she held dear. The guilt weighed heavily on her, but each meeting with Ethan left her craving more. What started as a reconnection of old friends soon blossomed into something much darker. Rachel's feelings for Ethan began to resurface in ways she hadn't expected. The warmth of their affair, the thrill of secrecy, and the passion of rediscovered love clouded her judgment. She was drawn to him in a way that was impossible to ignore. But with each stolen moment, the stakes grew higher. Rachel had become a woman living a double life, one foot still planted in her marriage to Michael, the other inching closer to the abyss of a passionate and reckless affair with Ethan. The perfect life she had built with Michael was slowly slipping away, and she knew that the lies would soon catch up to her. Yet she couldn't stop herself. The affair, like a drug, had taken hold, and there was no turning back. As the affair between Rachel and Ethan deepened, the tension between her two lives grew increasingly unbearable. She was trapped in a web of deception, juggling the responsibilities of being a wife and mother with the thrill and guilt of her secret meetings with Ethan. What had started as an innocent reconnection quickly spiraled out of control. Rachel's emotional attachment to Ethan became stronger, and with each passing day she found it harder to keep up the facade of a perfect, happy marriage. At home, Michael remained blissfully unaware. He noticed Rachel's growing distance, her mood swings, and the subtle changes in her behavior. But he chalked it up to the stress of raising two young children and managing a household. He had always been a hard worker, often coming home late from the office. But he assumed things would settle down once he had a break. He had no reason to suspect that his wife, the woman he had trusted with his entire life, was hiding a devastating secret. Rachel's ability to keep her affair hidden was impressive. She had become a master at deceiving Michael, carrying on her relationship with Ethan while maintaining the illusion of a loving wife. Rachel had convinced herself that what she was doing wasn't as bad as it seemed. She justified the affair by telling herself that she deserved to feel desired, to feel alive again. Ethan made her feel young, vibrant, and beautiful. Everything Michael no longer did. Their relationship was a whirlwind of passion and excitement, a stark contrast to the mundane routine she had settled into with her husband. But the guilt continued to eat away at her. She would come home from their secret meetings, her heart racing, trying to shake off the guilt only to be met by Michael's warm smile and the innocent joy of their children. It was becoming harder to live in two worlds at once. As the weeks passed, Rachel began to see a darker side of Ethan. What had initially seemed like a harmless affair now felt like a dangerous obsession. Ethan became increasingly possessive and demanding. He wanted more of her time, more of her attention, and he didn't want her to go back to Michael. He would send late-night texts insisting that they meet, even if it was just for a quick rendezvous. Ethan began to threaten that if Rachel didn't make a choice, him or Michael, he would expose their relationship to her husband. He wasn't willing to let her go without a fight, and the more Rachel tried to distance herself, the more Ethan pushed. Rachel's mind became a battleground. She could feel herself losing control, as though the affair was consuming her, leaving no room for the life she had built with Michael. She began to fear what might happen if Ethan went public with their secret. Her perfect life would come crashing down, and she wasn't sure she could handle the fallout. The thought of losing Michael, of breaking apart her family, was unbearable. But at the same time, the hold that Ethan had on her was undeniable. He knew her vulnerabilities, her desires, and he was using them to manipulate her into staying with him. The pressure was building. Rachel's once clear vision of her life began to blur. She couldn't imagine a future with either man, yet both had such a firm grip on her heart and mind that she couldn't imagine living without them. She knew she had to make a decision, but the thought of facing the consequences was terrifying. Her once carefree life was now a ticking time bomb, and she couldn't escape it. The lies were piling up, and she could feel the walls closing in around her. In the quiet moments when Rachel was alone with her thoughts, she began to realize just how far she had fallen. She was living a life she no longer recognized, her actions driven by a cocktail of guilt, fear, and desire. The affair with Ethan had started as an escape, but now it was a prison. And the more she tried to break free, the tighter the chains seemed to become. It was only a matter of time before something would give, and Rachel was not sure if she could survive the fallout. Rachel's world was spiraling. The more she tried to keep her secret hidden, the more she felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. Every day was a careful balancing act between her family life and her affair with Ethan. She had become so skilled at living a double life that she almost believed she could keep it all together. But deep down, she knew the facade couldn't last forever. Michael had become more aware of the changes in Rachel's behavior. He didn't suspect the affair, but he could sense that something was wrong. Rachel's smiles seemed forced, and she had become distant, always preoccupied with her phone or leaving the house on strange errands. Even their intimate moments had become sparse, and when they did occur, Rachel was always distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. She was no longer the woman he had married, the woman who used to laugh at his jokes and engage in their late-night talks. Michael's attempts to reach her, to bring back the connection they once had, were met with polite but empty responses. Meanwhile, Ethan's demands grew more intense. He wanted Rachel to choose him, to leave Michael, and he didn't want to wait any longer. The tension between them was palpable. Ethan had a way of making Rachel feel like she was the only person in the world who mattered, but his possessiveness was suffocating. Every time she tried to distance herself, Ethan pushed harder, convincing her that their love was worth any risk. He told her that Michael would never truly understand her, that only Ethan could give her the life she deserved. The pressure was relentless. Rachel felt as if she were drowning, caught between two worlds that were rapidly pulling her apart. Each time she returned home, she was consumed with guilt, but when she was with Ethan, she felt alive again, like the person she had once been, full of hope and passion. She had tried to end things with Ethan several times, but he always had a way of drawing her back in, making her feel like leaving him would be a mistake. But then, one night, things took a darker turn. Ethan's jealousy and frustration reached a boiling point. Rachel had planned to meet him to finally put an end to their affair, to tell him that she needed space and couldn't continue living like this. But Ethan didn't take kindly to her decision. Instead of understanding, he became enraged. He accused her of leading him on, of making promises she had no intention of keeping. His words cut deep, and Rachel realized she was no longer in control of the situation. As the argument escalated, Ethan's true nature emerged. He was no longer the charming man she had fallen for, but a man consumed by anger and desperation. His threats became more intense, and Rachel began to fear for her safety. He told her that if she couldn't be with him, he would destroy her life. Ethan's behavior was erratic, unpredictable, and it scared Rachel. He wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. He was a stranger now, someone capable of doing anything to get what he wanted. Rachel knew she had to make a choice, but the weight of her options was suffocating. Leaving Ethan meant facing the truth of her actions, facing Michael, confronting the lies and admitting the depth of her betrayal. But staying with Ethan would mean losing everything: her family, her home, and the life she had worked so hard to build. The night of the confrontation was the breaking point. Rachel's mind raced as she tried to find a way out. Ethan wasn't going to let her go easily, and she feared that the more she tried to end things, the more dangerous the situation would become. She knew she couldn't keep living this double life, but the fear of facing the consequences, the fear of what might happen next, made her decision feel impossible. Rachel had never felt so trapped, and as she stood at the crossroads of her choices, she realized the one thing that had become painfully clear. Something had to give. The life she once knew was gone, and now she was left with a decision that could change everything. Rachel's heart raced as the night of the confrontation arrived. The air in the house felt thick with tension, and every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified. She had called Ethan, asking him to come over, under the guise of needing to talk. But she knew that this meeting would be different. This was the night she planned to finally end things once and for all, to shut the door on a secret she could no longer bear. Ethan arrived at the house just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the rooms. His face, usually calm and composed, was now tight with anxiety and frustration. Rachel met him at the door, trying to mask the fear she felt inside, but the effort was futile. He could see it in her eyes. She was no longer the same woman he had fallen for. Her resolve was beginning to crack, and he knew it. They went to the living room, and Rachel motioned for him to sit. She could feel her hands trembling as she folded them in her lap, trying to steady herself. This was it. She had to end things. The lies, the guilt, the constant tension. It was all too much. She had to be strong for her family, for herself. But Ethan wasn't going to let go easily. He sat down across from her, his eyes locked on hers, filled with an intensity she couldn't ignore. "You can't be serious, Rachel," he said, his voice low and edged with desperation. "We've been through too much. You can't just walk away from this." Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Ethan's presence was suffocating, and for a moment she was paralyzed by the weight of his stare. He leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I'm not letting you go. Not like this." Rachel's chest tightened and her mind raced. She knew what he wanted from her, what he had always wanted, but she couldn't give it to him anymore. She had already sacrificed too much. Her marriage, her family, her peace of mind. Everything had been destroyed by this affair, but still Ethan wouldn't relent. His hands reached for hers and she recoiled instinctively, trying to pull away. That's when the situation shifted. Ethan's calm exterior cracked. His expression twisted, his mouth tightening into a grimace of frustration. "You think you can just walk away from me?" he spat, his voice rising. "You think you can leave without consequences? You've been lying to me this whole time, Rachel. You think I won't make you regret it?" Rachel's pulse quickened and she stood up, her legs shaky. This was no longer just an argument. It was something much darker. Ethan's face had changed. The charming man she had known was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. His eyes were wild and the air between them crackled with menace. He stepped toward her, and she took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "You don't get to do this to me," Ethan growled. "I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me?" Rachel's mind spun. This was the moment she had feared, the moment when everything she had been running from collided with reality. She was trapped, physically and emotionally. Ethan's anger was uncontrollable now, and she knew she had to get away from him before things escalated further. But before she could react, he grabbed her wrist, holding her firmly in place. The pressure in her chest felt unbearable and her mind raced. This was no longer a simple conversation. It had turned into something much more dangerous. She could feel Ethan's grip tightening, and the panic surged through her body. She yanked her arm away, but Ethan wasn't letting go. He pulled her toward him, his face inches from hers. His voice, now a harsh whisper, sent a chill down her spine. "If you won't be with me," he hissed, "then no one else will have you. You're mine, Rachel. No one else will take you away from me." Rachel's heart pounded, and every instinct in her body screamed to escape, but she couldn't move fast enough. The situation had gone from bad to worse in a matter of seconds, and she realized with horror that she was no longer in control. Desperation bubbled up inside her. Ethan wasn't the man she had once loved. He was a dangerous stranger now, consumed by his obsession with her. The truth hit her like a punch to the gut. Ethan was willing to destroy everything to keep her, even if it meant hurting her. In a panic, Rachel's eyes darted around the room, looking for anything to defend herself with. That S, when her gaze landed on a kitchen knife that had been left on the counter from earlier in the evening. In a moment of sheer survival instinct, Rachel reached for it, gripping the cold steel tightly in her hand. Ethan was still too close, his anger blinding him to everything but his desire to control her. As he lunged toward her again, something inside Rachel snapped. In the chaos of the moment she acted, the knife, still gripped tightly in her hand, found its mark. It all happened so quickly. One moment, she was holding it defensively. The next, Ethan's body crumpled to the ground in front of her. Blood pooled around him, a shocking contrast to the room's warm, dimly lit ambiance. Rachel stood frozen, staring at the man who had once been her lover, now lifeless on the floor. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in, and all she could feel was the numb, suffocating weight of her actions. She hadn't meant for this to happen, but it had. The affair, the lies, the pressure, it had all led to this moment. Now, there was no turning back. Rachel stood over Ethan's lifeless body, her heart racing as the gravity of what she had just done began to settle in. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on her as the sound of her ragged breathing filled the silence. The knife, slick with blood still gripped in her trembling hand, seemed like an alien object she could no longer recognize. For a few moments she stood frozen, unable to move or think clearly. Her mind spun, replaying the events that led up to this horrific moment, but nothing seemed to make sense. Her first instinct was to flee, to run, and never look back. But where would she go? What would she say? How could she explain this? Rachel's entire life had been built on lies, and now, there was no way to hide from the consequences. The perfect image she had once projected to the world had shattered, and she had no idea how to piece it back together. A cold rush of panic swept over her as she realized that time was slipping away. She couldn't stay in the house with Ethan's body. She needed to make a decision, quickly. Rachel's gaze flickered to the door, then back to Ethan, and for the first time she felt a deep, almost numbing sense of loss. What had she done? The man she had once been so connected to was gone, and in his place was a memory of a life that would never be the same. Her thoughts turned to Michael, the man who had been her husband, who had trusted her, who had loved her unconditionally. He had no idea of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under his nose. The guilt that now clawed at her insides was unbearable. How could she go back to him after this? How could she face her children, knowing that their mother had killed someone? The weight of her actions settled on her chest like a ton of bricks. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what to do next. She knew she had to leave the house. She couldn't stay here. But where would she go? The world felt impossibly small now, a prison with no way out. She couldn't turn herself in. The shame, the disgrace, the irreversible damage. It was too much to bear. She needed to think of something else, something that would protect her from the fallout. A plan began to form in her mind. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only choice she had left. Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. She knew that there was no turning back now. If she wanted to protect herself, if she wanted to keep her family from discovering the horrifying truth, she would have to take drastic steps. She quickly wiped the knife clean and put it back in the drawer, making sure there were no traces of what had happened. Her movements were mechanical now, driven by sheer survival instinct. The reality of the situation hadn't fully hit her yet. The idea that she had taken a life felt distant, as if it was someone else's story, not her own. Rachel quickly gathered her things. Her heart thudded in her chest as she stuffed clothes into a bag, not caring about the details. She just needed to leave, to get away from the scene of the crime. Her thoughts were in disarray, and every part of her screamed to run as far as possible. She couldn't stay in Ridgewood. She couldn't go back to Michael. She couldn't risk being caught. The web of lies was growing tighter around her, and she was suffocating. She grabbed her keys, her hands shaking uncontrollably, and headed out the door. As she stepped into the cool night air, the weight of her decision settled even deeper. There was no going back now. The world she had known was gone, and she had no idea where she was headed. She just knew that she couldn't face the consequences yet. She couldn't face Michael, her children, or the community that would tear her apart if they ever learned the truth. Driving away from her home, Rachel felt a sense of detachment, as though she were watching her life unravel from a distance. Everything was slipping through her fingers, and yet she couldn't stop. The guilt gnawed at her, but the fear of being caught was stronger. She drove through the dark streets, not caring about where she was headed, only that she was leaving behind the life that had led her to this moment. As Rachel drove into the unknown, she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The past was behind her, and the future seemed like an insurmountable wall. What had started as a forbidden affair had led to a murder, and now she was on the run. No matter what came next, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same. The choices she had made would haunt her forever, and there was no escaping the consequences.